Chapter 1. The Storm Arrives. This storm arrives. The wind screamed through the gaps between logs, and Josie listened to it the way she'd learned to listen to everything, without reaction, without expectation.
She'd survived worse than a blizzard.
She'd survived herself. Titan's low growl vibrated through the floorboards. She stopped with the poker halfway to the embers. The sound was foreign in the cabin, a frequency she hadn't heard in the 2 years since Pat's death. Titan didn't growl at weather. Titan didn't growl at deer pressing too close to the porch. Titan growled at the one night she'd tried not to wake up, when his barking had brought Dorothy from down the road, when her own blood had pooled on the kitchen tile. Titan, she said, not a command, just his name, spoken into the space between them. He didn't turn. His nose stayed fixed on the gap beneath the door, whiskers trembling. The growling stopped, but his body remained coiled, haunches tight, ready. Josie set down the poker. She moved to the hooks by the door where Pat's old canvas jacket still hung, the one she'd never been able to move, and she pulled it on. The fabric still smelled faintly of smoke and pine. She grabbed the shotgun from above the doorframe, pump-action Remington, kept loaded since the winter Pat had warned her about drifters who came through the passes when the snow buried the roads. She didn't rack the slide. Not yet. He came to her side, eyes still fixed on the door. She felt his warmth against her leg, the steady thrum of his heartbeat matching her own. They stood there, woman and dog, waiting. The knock came 3 minutes later, maybe 4. Time moved strangely in storms. Not a knock, really. A weight against the door, a fall. Josie's finger found the trigger guard. She didn't flip it off. I know you're in there. The voice was male, wrecked, barely audible over the wind. A pause. Please, I have a daughter. The words hit her like ice water. She thought of Lily Rose's shoes on the mantel. She thought of Pat's photo, his smile, the way he'd always said please and thank you to everyone, even people who didn't deserve it. Titan's ears flattened. Then, slowly, they rose. His tail, not wagging, but not stiff, gave a single, measured sweep. Josie stood frozen, the shotgun heavy in her hands, the fire dying behind her. The man on the other side of the door coughed, and the sound was wet, wrong, the cough of someone who was bleeding internally or worse. I have a daughter, he said again. She's with me. She's freezing. Josie looked down at Titan. He looked back at her, pale yellow eyes unblinking, and waited. Titan's whine cut through the wind, a sound that had once saved her life. Josie grabbed the Coleman lantern from the shelf, the medical kit from beneath the bathroom sink. She shrugged into the wool coat, the one Pat had bought in Jackson Hole their first winter together, and didn't bother with boots. Her old sorrels sat by the door already laced. The door opened and the world disappeared into white. She couldn't see the porch steps, couldn't see the trees. The wind shoved at her, screaming, and Titan was already halfway down the path before she'd taken 3 breaths. His massive shape disappeared into the snow, reappeared, disappeared again. Titan waited, but he wasn't running. He moved with that deliberate gait, the one he used when he'd smelled something wrong during her overdose, when he'd torn through the screen door to find Dorothy. The distress signal. She'd forgotten he still knew it. The rental cabin appeared like a ghost through the white. 100 yards. 200. The lights were on. Someone had lit the propane heater, but the windows showed nothing, reflected nothing. The door hung open. Josie raised the lantern. The beam cut through the doorway, illuminating a kitchenette, a couch, a coffee table overturned, and on the floor, a man. Mid-30s, maybe 40. Italian, she thought, though she didn't know how she knew that. Something about the bone structure, the heavy brow. He wore a cashmere vest, dark gray, torn at the shoulder. Blood soaked the fabric, spreading across the floor in a dark pool that had begun to freeze at the edges. His legs were twisted beneath him, one bent at an angle legs shouldn't bend. His skin had gone white, lips blue. She knelt. The lantern clicked against the floorboards. Gunshot wound, lower abdomen. Entry point only, no exit, which meant the bullet was still inside him. His pulse fluttered beneath her fingers, weak, irregular. Shock setting in. Hypothermia compounding the damage. No wallet, no ID, just the watch. Patek Philippe, worth more than Pat's truck had been, and the tattoo, a crest. Intricate, covering his forearm in dark ink. A family mark. She didn't recognize it, but she recognized what it meant. Josie worked. Pressure bandage, then another. She elevated his legs with a pillow from the couch, covered him with the wool blanket folded over the armrest. She couldn't move him alone. Too heavy, too far.
and the storm would kill them both if she tried to carry him through this. But she couldn't leave him. Titan stood by the door, watching, waiting. Josie hooked her arms beneath his shoulders, braced her back, and lifted. The fireman's carry came back like muscle memory, like ER nights, like carrying patients down hallways while their families cried in waiting rooms. The man groaned, his head rolling against her shoulder, but he didn't wake. Titan led her home through the white. The bullet had lodged in muscle, 3 inches left of center, missed everything vital by the width of a finger.
Josie had seen enough gunshot wounds in the ER to know luck when she saw it. Dumb, brutal luck, the kind that kept a man breathing just long enough to bleed out anyway. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, the smell sharp and familiar. Her hands remembered the motion despite 5 years away, the angle of the needle, the tension of suture thread, the particular way skin parted and held. Muscle memory. The body didn't forget what the mind tried to. The local anesthetic injected cleanly into surrounding tissue. The man's body convulsed once, a full-body tremor that rattled through his shoulders and settled. His hand clenched on the armrest, knuckles whitening, then relaxed. He didn't wake. Josie worked the forceps carefully, following the path of entry, feeling for the metal. The bullet came free with a wet click, a deformed slug, copper and lead, no bigger than her thumbnail. She dropped it into the metal bowl and kept going. 8 stitches. Clean even, the kind that wouldn't scar badly if he lived long enough to scar at all. She applied fresh bandages, layered and secure, then covered him with clean blankets pulled from the bedroom closet. Pat's old ones, wool and cedar, the smell of them almost enough to break her. Only then did she allow herself to look. The tattoo covered his forearm in intricate ink, a crest, unmistakably Italian, expensive work. A crown above a sword, flanked by serpents, the words too faded or too foreign to read. The kind of marking that meant something, that was earned or inherited, that placed him in a world she'd only seen in movies. She found his vest on the chair where she'd dropped it. Didn't search it. Not yet, not without reason. But when she moved it to wash the blood from her hands, the satellite phone and a bulky envelope fell to the floor. She didn't open the envelope, didn't touch the phone. Set both on the mantel, next to Lily Rose's shoes, the tiny pink sneakers Dorothy had sent after the funeral, still unworn, still too small. Titan settled at the foot of the sofa, massive body curled around the stranger's feet, eyes never leaving his face. Josie sat in the chair by the fire, rifle across her knees, and waited for dawn. Gray light crept through the frost-rimmed windows, pale and thin. The man opened his eyes, coal-black, sharp despite the fever haze, and assessed the room in seconds. Ceiling, walls, exits. The woman in the chair, the dog at his feet. His hand moved to his abdomen, found bandages, and paused. Josie said nothing. She sipped her coffee, black and bitter, and watched him wake. The man's gaze traveled the cabin's interior, the stone fireplace, the low beams, the rifle propped against the chair beside her. Then it landed on the mantel, the tiny pink sneakers, the framed photos she hadn't moved, the satellite phone, and the envelope she hadn't touched. "You saved my life." His voice came out graveled, careful. A slight Italian accent threaded through educated diction. "I did basic triage." Josie set the mug on the table. "You need antibiotics. A hospital would be better, but the storm won't break for 2 days, maybe 3. The man nodded slowly, processing. His eyes returned to her face, measuring, cataloging. "Who are you? The person who found you?" She didn't move. "The question is who you are, and why someone shot you." Silence stretched between them. The man's jaw tightened. His fingers curled once against the blanket, then released. "Oh, my name is Nico," he said finally. "I was traveling. There was an accident?" Josie's expression remained flat. "You have a satellite phone on my mantle. An accident doesn't explain that. Neither does the cash in that envelope or the tattoo or the watch that probably cost more than my mortgage." Nico's eyes narrowed, not anger, but calculation. He studied her for a long moment. "I can pay you," he said, "for your care, for your silence." Josie stood. The chair scraped against floorboards. She set her mug down and crossed her arms. "I don't need your money. I need to know if you're a threat to me or my dog." Nico's gaze moved to Titan, who hadn't blinked since the man woke. The mastiff's pale yellow eyes held steady, unblinking, massive head resting on crossed forepaws. "I'm not," Nico said quietly, "but others might be. Once they know where I am." The words hung in the air between them. Josie felt them settle, like the first snow of a coming blizzard, a declaration, a warning, a weight she hadn't asked to carry. "Then you'd better heal quickly." She kept her voice level. "And you'd better tell me the truth about what we're dealing with." Nico's expression shifted, not quite a smile, something more guarded, more fractured, an acknowledgement of respect, or at least the shape of it.
That
he said, is going to take longer than 2 days. Titan's tail gave a single, measured sweep against the floor. The storm broke on the fourth morning. Not fully, the wind still howled through the pass and snow continued falling, but the visibility had improved enough to see the tree line. Josie stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the white world reassemble itself piece by piece. Behind her, Nico had risen from the cot for the first time. He moved slowly, one hand pressed his abdomen, but he stood upright. His color had returned, fever broken, eyes clear and calculating as they swept the room. "You look better," Josie said without turning. "Feel better." He lowered himself into the chair by the fire, her chair, the one she'd slept in the first 2 nights. "Thank you." She heard the weight in those 2 words, not casual gratitude, something heavier. Josie turned and studied him. 3 days of enforced proximity had worn away some of his armor. The sharp edges remained those assessing eyes, the controlled posture, but he'd stopped measuring her as a threat somewhere around the second night. Now he simply sat, absorbing the fire's warmth, looking almost ordinary. "Almost. Frankie will come today," Nico said. "Once the roads are passable, he'll bring a vehicle. And then? Then I leave." He paused. "As promised. Clean." Josie nodded. The word felt insufficient. A promise between them carried more weight than 2 syllables could hold. She thought of Pat, of the promises she'd made and broken and kept. Life had a way of testing every vow. "You'll need to eat something before you go." She moved toward the small kitchen area. "Soup still warm. I can pay you." Nico's voice came quickly, the reflex of a man used to transactional relationships, for everything, the medical care, the shelter. "I don't want your money." "Then what?" Josie paused, her hand on the pot. What did she want? 3 days ago she'd wanted solitude. Silence. The quiet burial of her grief in this cabin, in this cold. Now everything had shifted. "Tell me one thing," she said, turning. "The truth. About Carmine. About why he really did it." Nico's jaw tightened. The firelight carved shadows across his face, aging him. "Because I was weak," he said finally. "Because I wanted out. Because I made the mistake of telling the wrong man that I was tired of killing." Josie absorbed this. A boss who wanted to leave. A lieutenant who smelled blood in the water. And now I rebuild. And I finish what he started, only the other direction. The words hung in the air. Josie understood what they meant, what he would do, what had to happen for him to survive. She ladled soup into a bowl and set it on the table beside him. Their fingers brushed briefly, warmth against warmth, skin against skin. Neither pulled away. "Eat," she said. "You'll need your strength." Nico's eyes held hers for a long moment. Something passed between them that neither named. Then he picked up the spoon and began to eat. Titan rose from his spot by the fire, stretched his massive frame, and padded to sit beside Nico's chair. His presence was deliberate, a statement of sorts. The mastiff's pale yellow eyes watched Nico with something that might have been acceptance. Nico's hand dropped, resting briefly on Titan's broad head. The dog didn't flinch, didn't move away. "He's decided," Josie said quietly, "about you. And you." Josie looked at the window, at the breaking storm, at the world waiting beyond. Her world had been small and safe and defined by loss. Now it was something else. "We'll see," she said. The cabin held its breath. Outside, the wind continued to die. Inside, 2 strangers sat with a fire between them and a dog who had chosen his side. Chapter 2: Truth Under Siege. The days settled into a rhythm. Morning brought wound care, cleaning, rebandaging, checking for infection. Afternoons meant cooking, cleaning, the mundane maintenance of survival. Evenings were for fire and silence and the slow accumulation of trust. Nico healed. His steps grew steadier, his color improved, and somewhere around day 3, the fever broke for good. But healing brought its own complications. Josie found him on the 4th afternoon standing in the middle of the main room, one hand braced against the wall, his jaw clenched against pain. He was testing his leg, putting weight on it, assessing. "You shouldn't be walking on that yet," she said from the doorway. His head turned. The sharpness in his gaze hadn't diminished. If anything, it had sharpened with confinement. "I need to be ready. For what?" The question hung between them. Nico released the wall and lowered himself back onto the sofa, his hand moving automatically to his bandaged side. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Soon enough." She didn't press. Some truths weren't ready to be spoken. Titan watched everything. The first 2 days, the Mastiff had positioned himself between Nico and Josie, not guarding her exactly, but monitoring. His massive head would lift at every sound, every shift of Nico's weight. By the third day, something changed. Nico spoke to him in low tones, soft Italian phrases that Josie didn't understand but felt. Stories about a dog named Luca, a cane corso he'd owned years ago. The way Nico's voice softened when he spoke about the dead animal, how Luca had been loyal, how he'd died protecting what was his. Titan's ears flattened, then rose. By the fifth day, he rinsed Nico's hand on his head. Josie noticed. She said nothing, but the calculation in her mind shifted. The shoes stayed on the mantel, small, pink, baby shoes that had never been worn. One evening, Nico asked about them. Josie told him, 26 weeks, 3 days. The words came out flat, rehearsed. She'd said them so many times to doctors, social workers, grief counselors, that they'd worn smooth. And your husband, Nico asked. He'd seen the photo on the wall. The man in the firefighter's uniform, arm around Josie, both of them squinting into summer sun, building collapse. Same year, same winter. Nico was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, the last of the snow dripped from the eaves. Then you know what loss feels like, he said finally. Real loss, not the political kind, not the strategic kind. Yes, that's why you saved me. It wasn't a question. Josie met his eyes, the dark depths that had assessed her as threat, then as asset, then as something else entirely. Partly, she admitted. The other part is that I'm a nurse. I couldn't let you die. You could have called 911, let someone else handle it. I could have. She didn't explain why she hadn't. Some choices didn't need explanation. They simply were. The conversation ended there. But something had shifted: the acknowledgement of parallel griefs, the mutual recognition that they were both people who had survived what should have killed them. The satellite phone rang at 7 in the morning. Josie was in the kitchen, boiling water for coffee. She watched Nico answer it, his voice dropping into rapid Italian. The conversation lasted 2 minutes, maybe 3, but his face changed, jaw tightening, eyes hardening into that familiar mask she'd seen when he'd first woken up on her cot. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, phone still in hand. Carmen's people found a lead, he said quietly. Not here. Not yet. But they're triangulating from the rental cabin. The police report will go into databases. Insurance investigators will ask questions. They have maybe 48 hours before someone traces the rental agreement to this region. Josie's pulse quickened. Then you leave tonight. Not yet. Frankie's arranging extraction. There's a window tomorrow afternoon, helicopter to a safe house in Cicero. From there I rebuild. And if they come here before the window closes, Nico's eyes were cold, then we have a problem. Josie moved the rifle mounted above the door. She checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, the way Pat had taught her years ago. I haven't fired this in 2 years, she said, but I can hit a target at 100 yards. Nico watched her with an expression that mixed respect and regret. You shouldn't have to, but I might. She slammed the magazine back into place. So I'm ready. Titan sensed the shift in tension. The Mastiff rose from his spot by the fire and positioned himself at the cabin's primary entry point, massive form alert, muscles coiled beneath gray, wrinkled skin. His pale yellow eyes tracked both of them. They won't come tonight, Nico said, though his voice carried no certainty. Carmen's men are still working the trail. They think I'm in Chicago or dead. The rental cabin was a mistake. Someone there saw the blood, made the connection. People make connections, yes. He ran a hand through his dark hair. That's why I need you to understand something. If they come here, you run. Take Titan. Go to the ridge trail that leads to the South Pass. Frankie's men will be waiting at the extraction point by noon tomorrow. You find them. This is my home, which is why you leave it. His voice was hard, final. I've brought enough destruction to your door. I won't let them hurt you too. Josie met his gaze. You can't control what happens, neither can I. I can try. The morning stretched ahead. They ate in silence, listening to every creak of the cabin, every shift of wind outside. Josie washed the dishes while Nico sat by the window watching the tree line. By afternoon, clouds gathered again, gray and heavy, threatening snow. That night, they did not sleep. They sat in darkness by the dying embers of the fire, listening to the wind and the settling sounds of the cabin, waiting for the sound of engines or footsteps that might signal Carmine's men. Nothing came, but the possibility hung between them like a held breath. The fire had burned down to embers. Orange light flickered against the walls, casting long shadows across the cabin's single room. Titan lay sprawled by the door, his massive chest rising and falling in the deep rhythm of sleep. Josie sat in the chair opposite Nico, her knees drawn up, watching the last of the flames die. She hadn't slept either. Couldn't. The silence outside felt wrong, too complete, too waiting. "I can't sleep," Nico said quietly. "Will you sit with me?" It wasn't a request, it was something quieter, an acknowledgement of the fragility of the hours ahead. Josie rose and crossed to the cot. She sat on its edge, leaving space between them. Nico stared into the embers. "My father, Giuseppe Ferrante, he built everything on loyalty, said it was the only currency that mattered." He paused. "He was murdered in his own restaurant, a rival faction. I was 3 tables away, heard the shots, ran to find him already gone." Josie said nothing. She'd learned that some confessions didn't require response, only witness. The police called it a hit. The family called it a failure of protection. His jaw tightened. "I was supposed to inherit a stable business. Instead, I inherited a war. I was 27. I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice." "No." His voice was flat. "You don't understand. Carmine was there that day. He was the first person to reach my father's body. First to swear loyalty to me. First to suggest that softness was a liability, that mercy was a tool enemies could exploit. And you believed him." "I believed what I could see. A family tearing itself apart. Rivals smelling blood. Soldiers questioning whether the new boss was strong enough to keep them alive." He exhaled slowly. "So yes, I became hard. I made decisions that cost people their lives. People I knew. People with families." His hand moved to his abdomen, where the wound lay beneath the bandages. Carmine was the cost of being certain. He was the price of appearing strong. Josie reached out. A small, deliberate motion. She placed her hand over his on his abdomen. She didn't speak. The gesture was enough. Miko's breath caught. Then he let it go. "Your daughter," he said after a long silence. "Did you hold her before she died?" The question hit her like cold water, but she answered. "For all 3 days. Pat held her too. We gave her a name, we told her stories about the life we'd imagined. We promised her things, and then her body gave out. Her lungs weren't ready. Her heart was strong, but not strong enough to keep going without her lungs." Nico's hand turned over, his fingers interlaced with Josie's, tentative, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said. Josie believed him. "I know." They sat in silence, hands joined, listening to the soft pop of embers and Titan's breathing. The mastiff shifted in his sleep, paws twitching, and the moment closed like a door shutting. Nico's expression became guarded again, the vulnerability sealed away behind the mask of survival. His hand withdrew gently from hers. "We should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be long." Josie nodded and returned to her chair, but she didn't close her eyes. Neither did he. They waited together in the dark, listening for engines that might never come. The helicopter is not Frankie's extraction. The timing is wrong. Nico's face went still. "Carmine," he said, one word that contained an entire calculation. He moved despite the wound, despite the pain, with sudden, lethal grace. He pulled Josie away from the window and into the corner of the cabin where the walls were thickest. "Get the rifle," he commanded. "1 magazine, bullets only. You don't try to be a hero. You shoot if anyone comes through that door. You get Titan, and you run to the back ridge. There's a game trail that leads 2 miles to an old mine entrance. You hole up there until dawn."
Nico.
Josie began.
Now,
His voice was not harsh, but it was absolute. Josie moved. She retrieved the rifle, checked the magazine, 6 rounds, and positioned herself with a clear line of sight to the door. Titan stood beside her, rigid with alert aggression. Nico moved to the window, careful not to be silhouetted. What he saw was 2 vehicles, a Suburban and an SUV, both black, both practical. Approximately 6 men visible, armed, they were setting perimeter. The spotlight went dark, the engines cut. What happened next was a moment of profound silence that stretched across 30 seconds and felt like an hour. Then gunfire. A burst through the window, shattering glass, the round finding the wall 3 feet to the left of where Josie stood. The window exploded in shards. Nico returned fire from his position. He had a pistol, retrieved from beneath the sofa cushions hours ago. 3 shots, precisely aimed. Deliberately not killing but sending a message: I am armed, I am not incapacitated. There was a shout from outside, voices in Italian, rapid and urgent. The firing ceased. A new voice, cold and familiar. Carmine Benedetto, using a megaphone. Nico, you're bleeding out in the snow. Why die for some rural whore? Come out, we end this clean. You don't have to die alone. Josie's hand tightened on the rifle. Nico's expression did not change, but something in his core seemed to harden further. Before Nico could respond, Titan moved. The massive dog, silent, uncooked by Carmen's threat, bolted forward. He crashed through the already broken window, 130 pounds of rage and loyalty incarnate, heading directly toward the nearest figure. No, Josie shouted, but Titan was already gone. Outside, there was chaos. A man screamed, a dog's growl that sounded like an avalanche, gunfire, wild, panicked. Nico used the moment. He moved to the door, opened it, and stepped into the Wyoming night like a man transitioning between worlds. Titan had already made his decision. The man called S went down with a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like air being punched from lungs, followed by a wet gurgle. The dog's jaws had found the meat of his inner thigh, and the artery there was spraying blood in a way that Josie's trained eyes recognized immediately. Arterial, catastrophic, survivable only with immediate intervention. S wouldn't be firing any more weapons. 2 other figures scrambled for position in the snow. Nico moved to the cabin doorway, his wounded leg apparently forgotten, and fired 3 controlled shots that kicked up snow and dirt in front of them. Not killing shots, warning shots. The message was received. The men dove for cover. Pastardi. Carmen's voice cracked through the megaphone. You're losing to a cripple. Nico didn't respond. His breathing was even, his aim steady. The fever had broken hours ago. The wound was closed. What remained was pain, but pain was a language he spoke fluently. Josie emerged through the shattered doorway, rifle pressed to her shoulder. The angle was wrong. Too many obstacles, too much chaos. She wouldn't waste a round on panic. But her presence changed everything. She stood beside Nico, shoulder to shoulder, and the calculation on Carmine's side shifted visibly. They weren't hunting a wounded man and an isolated woman anymore. They were hunting a man with resources, a woman who could shoot, and a dog that weighed as much as an adolescent human. The megaphone went silent. The Suburban's engine roared to life. Another time, Paisano, Carmine's voice came back, quieter now, almost intimate in its menace. Another time. Tires spun in snow. The vehicles pulled back, their headlights swinging across the clearing before disappearing into the darkness. Nico lowered his weapon. Go. Back ridge. Now. Tainas Pine. He will come. Go. Josie moved. The emergency pack was already by the door. She'd packed it hours ago when Nico first warned her this might happen. Water, first aid, flashlight, satellite phone. She clipped it to her belt and whistled for Titan. The Mastiff released Sandro's leg and bounded toward her, blood on his jaws, tail already wagging. Of course he was fine. He was always fine. She disappeared into the tree line with Titan at her heels. Behind her, she heard Nico's voice on the satellite phone, rapid Italian flowing like water. Frankie. Move the window up. 1 hour. Cicero. Send 2 teams. We have a down man outside. Treat him or leave him, your choice. And listen, you owe this woman everything. When this is over, the mortgage is gone. All of it. Legal, anonymous, untraceable. Are we clear? A pause. Then Nico's voice again, softer now but absolute. Yes. She matters. She matters enough. The sirens grew closer, threading through the mountains like something hungry. Nico moved through the cabin with the focus of a man who'd learned long ago that survival lived in the details. He retrieved the satellite phone first, powering it down and slipping it into his coat. The envelope of cash went next, 8,000 in used hundreds, no serial numbers that mattered. His father's photograph, creased from years of carrying, pressed into his breast pocket. He left the shell casings scattered near the door. Let the police find them. Let them find the broken window, the blood on the snow, the signs of struggle. The story would write itself. Frankie arrived with 2 men Nico recognized, Vito and Marco, both former military, both loyal past the point of reason. They moved through the cabin like surgeons, efficient and silent. Vito lifted S from the snow outside, the man's leg still pumping blood in weak arcs. Marco collected bullet casings, wiped surfaces, arranged furniture back into place. I'll call it in, Frankie said, pulling out a burner phone. Home invasion. Armed intruders. Occupants defended themselves and fled to safety. Make sure the 911 call sounds scared, Nico said. A woman panicked. It needs to be real. Frankie nodded, already dialing. By the time the first cruiser crested the ridge, the cabin would look exactly like what they needed it to be. A crime scene of violence inflicted upon innocent people. The blood on the snow would speak of attackers. The shattered window would speak of desperation. The empty cot, the cold fireplace, the sense of abandonment, all of it would paint a picture of people who had fled for their lives. Ease would receive care. Ferrante doctors, expensive and quiet. He would live, but he would understand something important. Carmine had sent him here, and Carmine had not protected him. That lesson would spread through the organization like a slow poison. Nico stood in the center of the now clean cabin. The air still carried the metallic tang of gunpowder, but the visible evidence was gone. What remained was a story, and the story would protect Josie. Frankie approached him. She is safe. She's in the hills. Titan is with her. I want them protected. Subtle. No overt security. Just watching. Until we stabilize. And you, Capo? The title settled over Nico like a weight, like an old coat. Formal acknowledgement. The throne reclaimed through blood and clarity. I'm going to Cicero, Nico said. And then I'm going to teach Carmine what betrayal costs. The gray walls of the Cicero safe house absorbed the light like something hungry. Nico stood at a table scattered with satellite maps, resource lists, and casualty reports. Frankie flanked him. Two other lieutenants, Sal and Enzo, stood at attention near the door, their faces carved from the same stone as the concrete around them. Carmine has lost face, Nico said, tapping a port facility marked in red on the map. Lost men, lost momentum. But not the port in Gary, Frankie said. No, not yet. Nico traced a line from Gary to the city. He still has connections to the political machine. Leverage over 3 district judges. He's wounded, but he's not incapacitated. The lieutenants exchanged glances. Nico felt their uncertainty, the way they measured his recovery against Carmine's remaining reach. Strategy, Nico continued. We isolate his support networks, cut off his supply lines, make the cost of sustaining him prohibitive for his remaining allies. How? Sal asked. We talked to Dominic. Nico named the lieutenant who had remained neutral through the conflict. We offer him Carmine's territories in exchange for neutrality. We guarantee his family's safety. We do the same with the port contacts. They work for us, or they work for nobody. Frankie nodded slowly. And Carmine? Carmine, Nico said quietly, is going to realize that I am not the soft target he thought I was. That the attempt on my life cost him the loyalty of his organization. He looked up from the map. And then I am going to give him a choice. Retire to Sicily and live comfortably, or die. And if he refuses, Enzo asked, then he dies. Nico said it without inflection, without drama, but we give him the courtesy of the choice first. That's the difference between him and me. Frankie exchanged a glance with Enzo, a moment that acknowledged something fundamental. The capo had returned, hardened by loss and clarified by mercy. The lieutenants filed out. Frankie lingered. The woman, Josie. She's still at the cabin? Yes. Subtle protection, no overt security. Frankie nodded, then left Nico alone in the gray room. As night fell over Cicero, Nico sat at the table. He removed a photograph of his father from his pocket. Giuseppe stared back at him, unsmiling, proud, unyielding. I'm bringing it back together, Nico said quietly to the photograph. The way you built it, the way you'd want it. He tucked the photo away. He did not mention Josie to the photograph. That was a conversation for when he understood what Josie meant, a conversation he could not yet have with the dead. Chapter 3: Descent into Twilight. The penthouse felt different at dawn. The glass walls caught the first light and threw it back in sharp angles, turning the space into something surgical. Nico sat in the black leather chair, reports fanned across the glass table like playing cards dealt from a deck stacked against him. Dom's in, Frankie said, standing by the window. Marchetti controls everything from Halstead to the river now. He's loyal signed papers this morning. The port, we own it. The inspectors looked the other way. The union rep got a new house in Winnetka. Frankie's mouth twitched. Implicit threats work better than explicit ones sometimes. Nico nodded. Morrison, reminded of his obligations. He'll play clean through the winter. The reports told a story of conquest. 1 week of surgical strikes had restructured the map, redrawn allegiances, and left Carmine's remaining allies trembling at the edges. Dominic Marchetti had switched sides. The port facility hummed with Ferrante-approved cargo. 3 judges had been reminded of their debts. Carmine, Nico asked. Frankie shifted his weight. He's accepted the offer. Sicily. Retirement. Flight leaves today, Rome, then Palermo. Today. By tomorrow, he's a ghost, no pursuit, no residuals. The family goes with him, wife, daughter, the grandkids. Nico set down the report he'd been reading. The words blurred, then sharpened into something else entirely. The memory of snow, of a cabin emerging from white, of a woman with tired eyes and steady hands. You're quiet, Frankie said. Nico rose and walked to the window. Lake Michigan stretched below, still as glass, and the sunrise bled gold across the water. The city woke in increments, lights flickering in distant towers, the first boats appearing on the harbor. Victory. The words sat wrong in his mouth. The penthouse had never felt like home. He'd known that for years, but he'd buried the knowledge under work, under power, under the weight of the name Ferrante. Now, standing at the window with the empire rebuilt behind him, he understood he'd reclaimed a throne, but the throne was a coffin. He thought of the cabin, of Josie sitting by the fire, rifle across her knees, watching the snow fall like it owed her nothing, of Titan's massive head resting on the sofa, of the mastiff's tail sweeping once across the blanket as if granting permission. He thought of the shoes on the mantel, small, pink, the size of his palm. Frankie, he said quietly, send word to the safe detail watching Wyoming. Frankie's eyebrows rose. You're concerned about retaliation? Carmine's out. His people are scattering? No. Nico turned from the window. I'm concerned that I'm sitting here and she's there, and the distance feels increasingly intolerable. Frankie was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Not in agreement, but in recognition. The capo had returned from the dead, rebuilt an empire, and extended mercy to the man who'd tried to end him. But the man behind the capo was still missing, still wandering in a Wyoming blizzard, still waiting for someone to open the door. I'll arrange it, Frankie said. Nico returned to the chair. The reports waited. The empire hummed. Outside, the sun climbed higher, turning the lake to fire, and the penthouse remained exactly what it had always been. A beautiful cage. The cabin felt different now. The crime scene had been cleaned, the bullet holes patched, the glass replaced. Forensically, there was no evidence of the violence, but Josie carried the memory in her body, in the tightness of her shoulders, in the way she now slept with the rifle within arm's reach. The anonymous payment on her mortgage had come through 3 days ago. The paperwork was a legal knot, a trust established in Wyoming, contributions made through an intermediary, a final note scrawled in someone else's hand. Keep it for me. She understood what the payment meant. It meant she was now indebted to a man who trafficked in violence and death. It meant there was no world in which she could claim to have remained uncontaminated by Nico's life. She was a woman who had tried to heal herself through isolation. Now she was bound through gratitude, through fear, through an emotion she could not yet name, to a man whose every choice created consequences that rippled outward. The satellite phone buzzed. A single message, unsigned. Are you safe? Josie stared at the words. She thought about responding. She thought about what safe even meant anymore. Instead, she walked to the mantel. She looked at the newborn shoes. She looked at Pat's face in the photograph. She looked at her daughter's tiny face in the camping photo, the one where Lily Rose was only 3 months old, swaddled in a carrier, eyes open and searching. I didn't know this was the price, she whispered to the photographs. I didn't know that saving someone would cost me everything I'd built to protect myself. Titan emerged from outside, his massive frame backlit by dawn light. He moved to Josie and pressed his head against her thigh, a gesture of solidarity and wordless understanding. His presence was warm, steady, the only constant she had left. Josie's hand trembled as she typed a response. We're safe because you made sure we are. She hit send before she could overthink it. Seconds later, the phone buzzed again. I'm coming back. 2 days. I need to see you. Josie did not respond. She turned the phone off, set it on the mantel beside the newborn shoes, and stood at the window watching the sun rise over the Wind River Range. The peaks caught fire, turning gold and rose, and the valley below remained shadowed in blue. The isolation she'd chosen had ended. She knew that now, and she knew, too, that she was not entirely certain this was a tragedy. Titan's tail swept once across the floor. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than any bullet Nico had ever taken. Josie pulled her hand back slowly, not from rejection but from the sheer vulnerability of what they'd just agreed to.
2 weeks. No empire, no phone calls, just the cabin, the fire, and the complicated truth of two people who had seen too much to pretend anymore. I'll show you the bedroom, she said, her voice steady but quiet. The cot is gone. I moved it to the storage shed after the shooting, after the window exploded, after she watched a man she barely knew walk out into a wall of gunfire with nothing but a pistol and a death wish. Nico nodded. He picked up a duffel bag she hadn't noticed him bring in, dark canvas, unremarkable, and followed her down the narrow hallway. The bedroom was small, a double bed with a wool blanket, a dresser scarred by age, and a window that looked out toward the ridge. It's not what you're used to, Josie said. It's perfect. She almost laughed. You live in a penthouse. I live in a box made of glass and money. Nico set the bag down beside the bed. This is the first place that's felt like it could hold something real. Josie stood in the doorway, uncertain. Titan's paws clicked on the hardwood behind her. The mastiff pushed past her leg and climbed onto the bed, claiming his spot with the gravity of a dog who had lost one master and wasn't about to lose his claim on this one. Nico watched the massive animal settle.
A small smile crossed his face, unguarded, almost boyish. He remembers me, he said. He remembers the night you almost died for us. Josie leaned against the doorframe. Dogs know who walks toward danger. The afternoon light shifted, turning the room amber. Outside, Frankie started the Tahoe and pulled away, the distant rumble of an engine fading into the mountains. They were alone now, truly alone. Josie realized her hands were shaking slightly and pressed them flat against her thighs. I'll start dinner. There's deer stew from yesterday, or I can make eggs. Stew. Nico moved toward her, stopping close enough that she could smell wool and cold air off him, and maybe Chifa. He hesitated. It was strange seeing him hesitate, this man who had ordered hits, who had walked out of an ambush, who had rebuilt an empire from nothing, hesitating over words. Maybe I could help, he said. I've never cooked anything that wasn't takeout, but I can follow instructions. Josie looked at him, at the scar peeking above his collarbone, at the way his hands hung at his sides, not reaching for anything, not demanding anything. You chop onions, she said, and you don't complain if they make you cry. I cry at onions all the time. It was a joke. A small, ordinary joke about onions, and it broke something open in her chest. She turned toward the kitchen. Come on, then. Let's see if the great Nico Ferrante can handle a knife. Titan's tail swept once against the quilt, and Nico followed her into the kitchen, leaving the door open behind them. The morning light came thin through the clouds, casting the porch in a pale gold that made the mountains look softer than they were. Josie wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and watched her breath fog in the cold air. Beside her, Nico sat with his own mug, the steam rising and disappearing before it could reach his lips. Titan's massive head rested on her lap, the dog's yellow eyes half closed but his ears alert to every sound the wind carried. 2 weeks. The word sat in her chest like a stone she'd learned to carry rather than remove. I have to return to Chicago, Nico said. His voice was steady, the way it always was when he delivered news that couldn't be negotiated. The empire is stabilizing, but it requires presence, regular presence. Josie nodded. She knew. She'd known since the first morning, when she'd woken to find him already awake, staring at the ceiling with the weight of 1,000 decisions waiting for him in the city. I know, she said. She didn't sound disappointed, merely accepting of what was true, but I'll return here. Nico turned to look at her, his dark eyes catching the light. 2 weeks every month, minimum, and on video calls on the nights I can't be here. And I'll build something in the cabin room that's yours, but also mine. A room that acknowledges this is home, home. The word landed differently now. She'd been afraid to use it for so long that the shape of it felt foreign on her tongue. A home, she said quietly, testing it. I've been afraid to use that word, why he asked it without pressure, simply curious. Because home implies permanence, and permanence implies vulnerability. Nico was quiet for a moment, then, yes, both things are true, both things are necessary. Josie set down her coffee mug. She stood and moved to the cabin's edge, her hand trailing along the weathered wood of the railing. The Wind River Range stretched before her, peaks sheathed in early snow, the same peaks that had witnessed her collapse and, improbably, her reconstruction. If we do this, she said, not turning around, I need your word that you won't use your reach to monitor me, to control me, or to keep me safe without my knowledge. I need to be able to make my own choices, even if some of those choices might be dangerous or foolish. Agreed. Nico's voice came from behind her. With one exception, if you're in genuine danger, life-threatening danger that you're unaware of, I reserve the right to intervene, but I will tell you afterward, and I will accept your anger. She turned. He was standing now, the blanket falling away from his shoulders. In the morning light, he looked like a man who had made peace with halves, half in the cabin, half in the city, neither whole but both present. That's acceptable, she said. Nico moved toward her. He took her hand, his fingers warm from the mug. I'm not offering you love, he said carefully, because love is what you felt for Pat and Lily Rose, and that's sacred ground. What I'm offering is presence, loyalty, and the willingness to be broken alongside you if that becomes necessary. Josie looked at him, at the scar on his jaw, at the way his stubble caught the light, at the uncertainty hidden beneath his certainty. That's enough, she said. That's more than enough. She turned to face him fully. She kissed him, not a dramatic gesture, but something tentative and honest, the kind of kiss two people exchange when they're acknowledging that the past cannot be undone, but the future can be inhabited. Titan's tail thumped against the cabin wall. The dog's massive head turned to follow them, and in the yellow eyes there was something that might be satisfaction. The sound of footsteps on gravel made them break apart. Frankie emerged from the tree line where he had been maintaining discreet perimeter. He approached with a deferential nod to Josie, an acknowledgement that in Nico's world, Josie Landry now held a position of respect. The helicopter is ready, Frankie said to Nico. 30 minutes to Chicago. Then we rotate in your preference. Nico looked at Josie. 2 weeks from today, I'm back. Same day of the week, same time of day. Can you live with that rhythm? Josie considered it. The isolation she'd chosen to survive was not compatible with the presence she now desired. The trade felt weighted in her favor. Yes, she said, as Nico prepared to leave, gathering his things, moving through the cabin with the efficiency of a man used to swift departures. Josie watched. She noticed that he paused at the mantel, looked at the newborn shoes, and placed a hand over them, a gesture of acknowledgement toward the daughter he never knew, but whose existence had become foundational to understanding Josie. When he turned back, he found Josie watching. She was real, Nico said. It was not a question. She was real, Josie confirmed, and she was loved. That's what matters. Nico nodded. He approached Josie again and held her forehead to his, a gesture that contained more than words. I'm coming back, he said. I know, Josie replied, at the helicopter, a sleek, anonymous aircraft that had descended into the clearing beside the cabin. Nico paused before boarding. He looked back at the cabin, at Josie standing in the doorway with Titan beside her, massive and loyal and alive. He raised his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it meant I am returning. I am not abandoning this. I am not abandoning you. Josie raised her hand in return. It meant I am waiting. I am no longer running. I am here. The helicopter lifted. It carried Nico back toward Chicago, toward the penthouse and the empire, toward the network of violence and power that sustained him. But something had changed. The cabin was no longer merely a refuge for the desperate. It had become a refuge for the living. Josie turned back to Titan. She ran her hand over his massive head, and the dog's tail moved with a rhythm that had not been evident in 2 years of mourning. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled. The mantel held the shoes, the photographs, and now a new addition. A photograph of Nico and Josie taken by Frankie, standing on the cabin porch with Titan between them, autumn light catching in their hair, both of them half smiling with the careful, tentative joy of people learning to live again. Josie closed the cabin door against the Wyoming wind. Tomorrow, she would resume her small routines, the maintenance, the cooking, the quiet work of living. But today, she sat by the fire with Titan, and she allowed herself to imagine 2 weeks from now, when the helicopter returns. The morning of Christmas Day arrived in that particular Wyoming way, pale light filtering through the snow, silence so complete it felt like a held breath. Josie woke before Nico, as she always did, and found him still asleep on the cot that had become their shared bed. 3 months had transformed the cabin into something neither of them had expected, a place where violence had touched and retreated, leaving room for something quieter to grow. She rose quietly and let Titan out onto the porch. The mastiff stood in the snow, his breath misting in the cold, and Josie watched him survey his domain. His movements had changed since October. The stiffness that came from grief had softened into something more fluid, more present. He trotted back to her and pressed his massive head against her thigh, and she scratched behind his ears the way Pat used to. Inside, Nico was stirring. He sat up when she returned, his dark hair tousled, his eyes finding her with the automatic awareness of a man who had learned to track safety. "Morning," he said. "Morning. Coffee's ready." They moved through the cabin in the easy choreography they had developed, the 2 weeks together, then the 2 weeks apart, the video calls that had become a lifeline. Nico would call every night he was in Chicago, sometimes just to show her the view from the penthouse, sometimes to tell her about the meetings that were slowly, deliberately shifting in texture. Today was different. Today, Nico had arrived 2 weeks ago and chosen to stay through the holidays. It was the longest stretch they had shared since the blizzard, and Josie felt the weight of that choice settle into her chest like warmth. She had prepared a small celebration, a meal of roasted chicken and vegetables from the cellar, candles she had bought in Lander, and a single gift wrapped in brown paper. No alcohol. They had both found that clarity suited them better than escape. Nico produced his gifts first. For Titan, a collar of deep Italian leather, the stitching fine and deliberate. Embossed on the inner band, NFJLTL. Josie ran her thumb over the letters and looked at Nico. "A merged household," she said. "A merged household," he agreed. Titan accepted the collar with the gravity of a dog who understood significance. He wore it like a medal. For Josie, Nico placed a book on the table, an old first edition copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. She opened the flyleaf and read the inscription in his careful script. "For someone who understands that revenge and mercy are not opposites but choices." She met his eyes.
Dantes spent 14 years in the Chateau d'If.
And then he spent the rest of his life choosing what his freedom meant. Nico's voice was low. "I think you understand that better than anyone." Josie set the book aside and retrieved her own gift, a frame she had made in Lander, the wood simple, unvarnished. Inside, 2 photographs. On the left, Giuseppe Ferrante, Nico's father, taken from the photograph Nico carried. On the right, Pat and Josie with infant Lily Rose, the only image they had of her. Beneath the photographs, Josie had written in small, steady letters 2 families, 2 griefs, 1 home. Nico stared at the frame for a long time. His jaw tightened and he breathed slowly through his nose. When he looked up, his eyes were wet but not spilling. "She was real," he said. "She was real," Josie said. "And she was loved. That's what matters." They sat by the fire as the afternoon dimmed into evening. Nico spoke quietly about Carmine's arrival in Palermo, about the organization stabilizing, about Dominic Marchetti's territories and the judges who kept the machinery running. He spoke about violence that would continue but now felt managed, predictable, sustainable. "And you," Josie asked, "are you sustainable?" Nico was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the fire, then at Josie. "I was built for empire," he said. "I thought survival meant power, meant control, meant never allowing anyone close enough to hurt me. And then I crashed into a cabin in a blizzard, and a woman who should have called 911 chose instead to save me. And I realized that power, the kind that matters, isn't about empire. It's about this." He gestured at the room, at Josie, at Titan, at the fire casting shadows that made the space feel held and alive. "I'm going to shift my role. Frankie will take operational command. I'll keep the strategic architecture. I'm not naive enough to think I can disappear entirely, but I'll split my time differently. 6 months in Chicago, 6 months here, building what my father never had, a life beyond the organization." Josie absorbed this. "Will that be enough? Won't you miss the intensity?" "I'll find new intensities," Nico replied. "There's intensity in learning to live without armor, in choosing words over orders, in understanding that the greatest power isn't in making people fear you, but in allowing someone to see all of you and choosing to stay anyway." He looked directly at Josie, like you did. Josie reached up and placed her hand on his face, a gesture that had become their quiet language of affection. "Like I'm doing?" she corrected gently. The fire burned down. The cabin settled into its night sounds, the wind, the settling wood, Titan's soft snore. In the darkness, Nico and Josie sat with their fingers interlaced, their separate griefs having been witnessed and held and improbably transformed into something neither could have built alone. Webbling to 6 months in Chicago, 6 months here, building what my father never had a life beyond the organization. Josie absorbed this. Will that be enough? Won't you miss the intensity? I'll find new intensities, Nico replied. There's intensity in learning to live without armor, in choosing words over orders, in understanding that the greatest power isn't in making people fear you, but in allowing someone to see all of you and choosing to stay anyway. He looked directly at Josie, like you did. Josie reached up and placed her hand on his face, a gesture that had become their quiet language of affection. Like I'm doing, she corrected gently. The fire burned down. The cabin settled into its night sounds, the wind, the settling wood, Titan's soft snore. In the darkness, Nico and Josie sat with their fingers interlaced, their separate griefs having been witnessed and held and, improbably, transformed into something neither could have built alone.